Welcome to Season 8 of Alone, Denmark Edition. 7 survival experts are sent to the icy polar regions. The last person standing wins $1 million, but they can only bring 10 specific tools. They must cope with extreme isolation and constant threats from wild animals, which they can also turn into food, as did previous champions. Contestant Klaus thinks he can win by hunting large animals. Owning an outdoor gear store and being a well-known local hunting guide, he has the skills. He had just hunted a brown bear before joining the challenge, seeking a quiet place to overcome the grief of his father's death. But upon arrival, memories of hunting with his father brought him to tears. Next is Anne, a fishing-loving nurse. She traveled across Scandinavia to fish and is accustomed to the cold. Believing her fishing skills will make her stand out, she inspected her territory before starting to fish. This season, to prevent cheating, the show limited tools. Anne chose 2 rods and 10 lures, quickly assembling her gear and starting to fish. She expertly caught a fish weighing over 10 pounds, enough for a week, though she cut her hand while removing the hook but ignored the injury for the sake of a full stomach. The third contestant, Soren, an artisan skilled in Viking-era crafts, made his own axe for the challenge. He quickly created a simple tent, but aims to build a luxurious log cabin. His first task is securing food to ensure survival. Ulrich, a skilled shooting coach and frequent hunting leader, confidently patrols his territory. Discovering fox droppings, he deduces a fox passed by recently, seeing it as a perfect start if he can catch it. Finally, 57-year-old Met appears kind but is a fierce competitor with a home full of trophies. A traditional goldsmith for the royal court, and an avid hunter who prefers bows. Her extensive survival skills from years of outdoor experiences make her confident in winning the challenge. The 6th contestant to appear is Bettina, a 37-year-old who has no children. She joined the challenge for the prize money and to advertise herself for marriage. Upon seeing splashes around her territory, Bettina got excited because she excels at fishing. She bought 2 motorboats for this purpose and spends her free time fishing, always making good catches. Known as Codfish Sister, now in the Arctic wilderness without a fish finder, it remains to be seen if she can still catch enough fish to sustain herself. The last contestant to appear is Anders, who luckily drew a prime location. His island is surrounded on 3 sides by water and backed by dense jungle, providing both hunting opportunities and building materials. More fortunate still, he found a shelter upon landing, a huge rock providing enough cover to shield him from the elements, and he didn't need to build a temporary shelter, thus saving a lot of energy. Anders is an outdoor activities instructor who occasionally teaches survival skills to his students and has filmed these sessions for a popular social media site, gaining nearly 120,000 followers. This process has also taught him a lot about survival, and he's confident he can last until the end. Meanwhile, Bettina has set up her tent and started assembling her fishing gear with professional skill, though her casting technique was not quite perfect, almost hitting her foot with the bait. Luckily, it didn't affect her fishing. After a tough struggle, she dragged a fish ashore and brought a fish keeper, suggesting her chosen items were likely a lure rod, artificial bait, and fish keeper. This might be a wise choice, as she can keep any extra fish alive in the water, possibly preserving them longer than if they were smoked. While everyone else was busy finding food and building shelters, Anders was idly listening to nature's sounds. As dusk approached, he finally started to gather wood, scraping shavings with his knife, but failed to ignite the firewood. Remembering from home how pine resin not only bonds strongly, but also aids in burning, he decisively went out to find pine trees, scraping some powder to bring back to camp. With the resin's help, Anders easily lit a campfire. Landing Meta didn't rush to hunt, but started gathering berries, the easiest food for challengers to collect, but also the easiest to overlook due to the harsh environmental conditions of northern Finland, above the Arctic Circle. The extreme climate can cause severe temperature shifts, possibly leading to everything being frozen after a storm, causing the berries to fall and disappear. Facing such a harsh survival environment, the first thing challengers do is build a warm and comfortable permanent shelter. By the end of the day, Meta had collected enough berries for a dinner of berry soup. Day 2 of the survival challenge. Klaus woke up to a herd of antelopes. Unfortunately, he hadn't chosen any hunting tools and had to continue fishing. His first catch was nutritionally valuable, making a good wilderness breakfast. Meanwhile, Anders was struggling to gather materials. The trees near his camp were very thick and tall, making them hard to cut and transport, consuming a lot of his energy. Building the frame was also challenging. Doing it alone wasn't easy, especially with such large pieces. The structure would not stay up, repeatedly collapsing. Finally, when it seemed stable, a slight touch caused it to fall again. It seems that talking big in videos at home and surviving in real conditions are quite different. Meta said her shelter was ready. Next, she went fishing to solve dinner. From her casting posture, it was clear she wasn't a professional. But she was lucky. A fish bit almost immediately. She was so excited that she trembled all over. After much effort, she finally dragged it to the shore, but it slipped off the hook. Klaus was much luckier. Judging by the spinning speed of the reel, it must have been a big fish. It took a while to reel it in. He grabbed a stick and hit it a few times, fearing the fish might escape. It was indeed a big fish, enough to feed him for a week. Everyone was busy fishing, except Soren, who leisurely boiled water. He couldn't fish and didn't bring a rod, so he pinned all his hopes on a fishing net. However, contrary to his wishes, not only was there no fish in the net, but it also got twisted by the waves. Now he had to spend time untangling it. This is a major issue with using fishing nets. Considering the length might be causing the tangles, Soren cut it in half. He set the net again, hoping to catch some fish this time. As night fell, those who caught fish enjoyed fish soup, while those who didn't just had plain water. On the third day, Ulrich made berry tea. Although he had gone hunting over the past few days, he tried to attract a crow nearby by mimicking its call. Perhaps his imitation wasn't accurate. He scared the crow away. Anders, after relentless effort, finally got his shelter up. Now he was checking the wind direction to decide where to build a fireplace. He collected large stones and moss from nearby. However, the wind direction was the opposite of his estimate, and the smoke filled the shelter. It was so smoky, sleeping inside might turn someone into jerky. He had no choice but to dismantle the fireplace and move it to the other end of the shelter. His day was spent stacking stones, and just as he was about to finish, he had to start over. On the fourth day, Anne started fishing in the morning. Unfortunately, her first cast got stuck underwater. She struggled for a long time but couldn't retrieve it. She debated on the shore for a long time before deciding to retrieve it by entering the water. Each person can carry up to 10 lures, and each loss reduces the chance of winning by 10%. She searched in the cold water for a long time, but ultimately found nothing. It was somewhat disappointing. Klaus woke up feeling unwell, needing to use the bathroom every half hour, and his heart rate was faster than usual. But he didn't want to go home just yet, and quickly brewed some tea to calm his nerves. Meta took out her ancestral bow and arrow, planning to start hunting in the area. This season, only she and Ulrich brought bows and arrows, hoping to obtain protein through hunting. Bettina caught another big fish early in the morning. Suddenly, a small boat sped through the water. Could someone be quitting? It turned out that Klaus felt unwell simply because he hadn't received enough energy. The doctor advised him to rest more and replenish his strength, assuring him that there was nothing wrong with his health. After saying this, the doctor left. The survival challenge reached its 5th day. Anne watched a herd of reindeer approaching, and tears of excitement streamed down her face. However, she hadn't brought any hunting tools. She could only hope to catch the rich protein by setting traps. But before that, she needed to check the gill net. Because the net was placed in deep water, she had to remove her pants every time to enter the water. It was not only troublesome, but also freezing. Luckily, today the net caught a fish, making her so happy she nearly jumped for joy. The fish weighed over 10 pounds, enough for several meals. While processing the fish, another fish got hooked. It was a perfect buy 2 get 1 free situation, ideal for making smoked fish. At that moment, Soren also arrived at the lakeside. As he cast the net, he immediately felt its heavy weight. Soon, a large fish was dragged out of the water, marking the first sighting of protein in 5 days. Soren, excited, shouted out loud. Unfortunately, the fish was not a common variety, and he was unsure if it was edible. His only option was to knock it out and study it after dissecting. Inside, he found many small round beads, unsure if they were fish eggs or a disease. Driven by hunger, he decided not to delve further and ate them all, a desperate measure indeed. If he remained unharmed after eating, he would continue the challenge. If poisoned, he would have to quit and go home. Meanwhile, Meta, who had been searching for prey, finally made a new discovery. A pile of feces indicated a fox was nearby. To avoid startling it, she immediately hid and tried to lure the fox. She waited until dark but saw nothing and had to settle for drinking plain water for dinner. However, Meta expressed confidence in her hunting skills, backed by her proven track record, believing she would not let her next prey escape. Bettina was constructing a shelter. Her choice of materials and design were solid and sensible. To save time on cutting wood, she collected water-soaked logs from the river, though it was physically taxing. Fortunately, her fishing skills were commendable. After 5 days of relentless effort, the frame was completed. Now, she just needed to hang the waterproof fabric to move in. However, to stay warm through the winter, she still needed to make improvements. By the 6th day, Klaus was marveling at the abundant resources around him. After a day's rest, he felt rejuvenated and returned to the lake to fish. His spot was deep, promising richer resources. As long as he could catch fish daily, winning was not a problem. Unfortunately, his fishing line got stuck at the bottom today, and after much effort, he had to give up. With no fish caught, he boiled water to drink, wondering why he didn't use the fish heads hanging in the trees for soup instead. Klaus had joined this challenge to overcome the pain of losing his father, recalling the days they hunted together, which brought him to tears. Ulrich finally set aside his bow and arrow and started fishing with a net. He had begun building a raft 3 days earlier, using twigs to form a circle and thicker branches for reinforcement. After wrapping it with waterproof fabric, he tested it in the water, and it floated successfully. Now, he could deploy the fishing net in deeper waters. However, the raft was a bit large, making paddling strenuous. On day 5, he upgraded it, making it significantly more refined. Today, as he tried to pull the net toward deeper waters, the raft performed well, but the support on the shore collapsed. He had to return to shore to fix the support and go back to the deep waters. While managing the net, he accidentally punctured the raft. Fortunately, the water was shallow enough to drag the raft back to shore, albeit with continuous cursing. At this moment, Anders was braving the rain to haul in his net, which was already half pulled in but devoid of fish. He suspected the net was set too shallow and decided to craft a tool to lower it into deeper waters. He chopped 2 10-meter-long branches and used the tool to join them. Armed with a twist drill, Anders found woodworking much easier. He utilized a mortise and tenon structure, eliminating the need for nails. He simply drilled holes in the wood and inserted wooden wedges to secure them. With this ingenious tool, Anders greatly eased his task. Soon, he had assembled a wooden pole over 10 meters long, dragged it to the beach, attached the net, and gradually pushed the pole into the water. Unfortunately, the strong winds and waves today quickly pushed the wood back to shore. Anders struggled back and forth for a long time before finally setting the net properly. Whether he would catch fish tomorrow was now up to luck. Meanwhile, Soren spent his days checking the fishing net and collecting materials to build what he hoped would be the most luxurious log cabin in the wilderness. He needed a lot of wood for this project. He had started building the shelter on the 4th day, being a traditional craftsman with high standards for detail. It took until today to erect the frame, which looked impressive, though it was uncertain if he could finish before the onset of winter. On the 7th day, Soren woke up early and began boiling wood ash in a pot. He then collected some mosquito-repellent herbs, crushed them with a stick, and after hours of refining produced primitive soap water. He took it to the shore for a bath. Those familiar with wilderness survival shows know that bathing often leads to unfortunate outcomes. But he bathed anyway. Afterward, Soren ran back to the shelter, dried himself by a large fire, and enjoyed a cup of hot tea. He certainly knew how to enjoy himself. Anders, on the other hand, drank a cup of plain water and went to check the fishing net he had set the previous day. From the shore, the net looked fine in the water, and he hoped for a big catch. Eager, he began to haul it in, only to find the net tangled around a stick. After a day's work, he ended up with no fish and, frustrated, tore the net to shreds. Now, with the net destroyed, Anders pondered how he would survive here. The survival challenge reached its 8th day. Bettina dug up some earthworms by the shore and started another day of fishing. Previously, she had used artificial bait with heavy losses. Switching to earthworms proved surprisingly effective, and she soon caught fish. Although not large, they were enough for a day's meal. Anders, having not caught any fish for several days, was so hungry he started chewing on tree bark. To improve its texture, he left it to dry overnight and toasted it over a fire before eating. It turned out to be quite chewy and tasty. Suddenly, a boat from the production team appeared, stirring up water. Was someone quitting the competition? However, they were merely checking on the contestants and reminding them that winter was approaching and to prepare for the cold. Energized like they had been injected with adrenaline, the contestants immediately set to work improving their shelters. To keep off the cold ground while sleeping, Bettina found a thick log, sawed notches for legs, and assembled a solid wood bed. Despite the heavy lifting, it was comfortable, and Bettina found it very cozy to lie on. Klaus, in a humorous mishap, fell into the water while setting his net, soaking his shoes and clothes. To dry them and retain heat, he stood directly over a fire, roasting them dry. Anders felt the winter chill upon waking. He decided to make his shelter smaller, using only a few wooden poles for the tent. It was easy to modify, and he tightly sealed the roof to enhance insulation. However, the shelter's shape looked odd. Afterward, his main concern was catching a fish to satisfy his hunger. Since arriving, he had not seen any protein, and his fishing net was now torn. Fishing became his only hope, but hours passed without any activity, possibly indicating another day without a catch. Klaus also arrived at the shore to check his nets. They felt unusually heavy, and when he finally pulled them from the water, 2 large fish were hanging from them. Quickly, Klaus returned to his shelter and started eating the fish, while Anders continued his futile wait by the shore. He was not the only one starving. Soren was cooking bark inside his shelter. He had brought only a fishing net, relying on luck for his meals while spending his free time building. The temperature had dropped significantly by the 9th day. Anders suddenly produced a large candle that turned out to be a mini-stove, convenient for boiling water and keeping warm amidst the changing weather. Each person adapted differently. Bettina stayed inside her shelter by the fire, thanks to her ample food supplies, while others had to continue searching for food. At that moment, the production team's boat appeared on the water. The camera zoomed in, revealing that Anders had withdrawn from the competition. He was struggling mentally and also missed his 2 children deeply. Before leaving, he made sure to pick out 2 stones as gifts for them. With these regrets, Anders left the competition. It was Ulrich's 11th day, and he spent the morning by the lake with a bow and arrows, watching the bobbers in the water. He caught his first fish, which was small and covered in leeches. Despite its unappealing appearance, Ulrich could not afford to discard it because he desperately needed the protein. After roasting the fishtail over a fire, he searched the forest for some carbohydrates to complement the small amount of fish meat. The soft bark, when cooked, was edible. Meanwhile, Soren also cooked a batch of bark, having dedicated his main efforts to building. He checked his fishing net occasionally, but had no food reserves. After cooking the bark for 3 hours, he hung it up to dry. The camera then focused on Anne, whose shelter interior was complete but looked disorganized. Without proper insulation, the cold weather posed a danger. Her sharply shaped shelter made it difficult to cover with moss directly, so she chopped more wood to upgrade the external walls, now potentially ready for moss hanging. As night fell, everyone prepared their dinners. Soren, still dreading another meal of bark, checked his fishing net only to find it empty as usual, resigning himself to another day of eating bark. On the other hand, Ulrich, celebrating his fish dinner, split a log for food and paired it with plain bark, achieving a balanced meal. On the 13th day, Bettina found a new entertainment, making a nameplate for her camp. Her purpose here wasn't just to make money, but because of a bet with her boyfriend of 8 years. If she won the challenge, he would move in with her. After setting down the nameplate, Bettina went out to fish. As strong as ever, she quickly caught a fish. However, distracted by the chirping birds, she fed them some of her cherished fish meat, which she had in abundance. While waiting patiently, she successfully made friends with the birds. Meanwhile, Ulrich stood under a tree, urinating and foraging, unlikely to succeed in his efforts. Nonetheless, he gathered some berries, a good source of vitamins and tasty too. Soren enjoyed his fortune of wild mushrooms, making a delicious mushroom soup that started his day of chopping wood to upgrade his cottage. He wouldn't work continuously, occasionally stopping to eat some berries. As the saying goes, if you can't catch fish, pick berries. He feared he might die of hunger before finishing his house. At the same time, Claus was checking the fishing net he had set the previous day, finding a small fish inside. He planned to gather chicken of the woods mushrooms as a treat for himself. Upon returning to camp, a fish feast was arranged with fresh, grilled fish. Nothing tasted better. Bettina, on the other hand, suddenly waved a white flag with a smile. It seemed she might quit the contest, but it turned out she was just commemorating her first bowel movement in the Finnish wilderness. Today, the crew performed routine checks. Everyone looked tired from the harsh conditions, but Bettina went to the shore, wanting to go home. She missed hamburgers, fries, and her boyfriend, having dreamt of food often. She respected those still competing, but pressing the button would give her everything she wanted, so she chose to end her challenge while still enjoying it. A convincing reason to quit. Now, only 5 contestants remained. Meta, a vegetarian at her limit, grabbed a fishing rod and began fishing at the river. She caught a small fish, and despite her initial disdain, she excitedly gutted and grilled it. Eating the charred fish, she reminisced about better days, finding today's grilled fish delicious. On the other side of the river, Ulrich, armed with a bow and arrow, waited. Only he and Meta had weapons this season, but neither had any luck so far. Determined, Ulrich got up early in the cold to hunt. As dawn broke, a fox appeared. His adrenaline surged as he mistakenly switched arrows, waiting for the fox to come within 35 meters. The fox, sensing danger, stopped, and startled by Ulrich's imitation of a fox call, turned and ran away. Missing the fox felt like losing millions. With the other contestants' current standing, capturing the fox could have likely secured Ulrich's victory in the contest. Meta, who also held a bow and arrow, had completely given up on hunting and shifted her focus entirely to fishing. She finally caught a fish, but ate it all in one meal, so breakfast was still reed roots. Previously, she boiled them for drinking. Now she had to chop and eat them because she was too hungry. Thankfully, there were reeds by the lake, or she would have quit the contest. With the little energy from the reeds, Meta went to the lake and clumsily cast her fishing rod, hoping to catch a fish to eat. Surprisingly, she got lucky immediately as a fish bit the bait. From the splashing water, it was clear the fish was big. Meta struggled greatly to pull it to shore while the fish kept thrashing in the water. Exhausted, she used her last bit of strength to try and land the big fish, but it got stuck on a stick and escaped. Frustrated, Meta sat by the shore cursing, losing all desire to continue fishing, and grumblingly returned to the camp. Meanwhile, Anne had been busy remodeling the shelter, searching everywhere for wood to chop, which was really exhausting for her small frame. However, she found a pleasant surprise, a moose skeleton, which she could use as a decoration or break to make soup. After days of relentless effort, the old rain shelter finally transformed into a little wooden cottage fit for a princess. With the shelter built, Anne could focus on food. But as the temperature dropped, the chances of catching fish decreased. Sometimes she spent a full day without catching anything. Anne's fishing net was in a deep area, requiring her to undress and endure the freezing water every time she checked it. Anne ran back to the shelter, dried her trousers by the fire, and boiled water to warm up. Nearby, Klaus collected blueberries, his hands covered in cold jam. The cold weather caused more cracks in his fingers, painfully stinging like needle pricks. Despite the pain, Klaus went to the shore to check his nets, hoping to catch a fish. He observed the fishing line he had rigged from a discarded fishing net with 7 hooks, equivalent to 7 rods. He should have caught something, but there was nothing. Klaus kept trying different baits, but none were very effective. Though he occasionally caught a few fish, it was hardly enough compared to the energy expended. Another day went by with an empty stomach. On the 15th day of the challenge, Anne hesitated before undressing to enter the water. Fortunately, the fishing net did not disappoint this time, holding 3 plump barracudas. After getting out of the water, she hurriedly warmed herself by the fire, swiftly cleaned the fish, and boiled them over the fire. Eating the meat and sipping the soup warmed her homesick heart. Full, Anne's maternal instincts overflowed, and she fed the extra food to the birds, a sight that would have enraged Meta, who hadn't seen protein since her arrival, surviving on boiled reeds. Hopeful but not surprised by the empty fishing net, she reluctantly picked up a fishing rod, her weakest skill, and tried her luck by the river. To her shock, the bend in the rod suggested the fish weighed at least over 10 pounds. The big fish Meta had just slipped through her fingers. On the way back, she was so regretful that she felt sick. She wondered if this mistake would affect her next competition. 5 hours earlier, before dawn, Ulrich had gotten up for work. He put on a headlamp and thermal pants, grabbed his compound bow and camera, and left the house. His task for the day was still hunting. Ulrich waited in the wilderness until dawn, and finally spotted his prey. The safest choice for hunting small animals was a headshot, but the animal kept eluding him. Trying to mimic a fox's call to attract it, he only succeeded in scaring it away. Ulrich regretted not taking the initiative. He could have brought home a fox pelt as a toy for his son. After another unsuccessful hunt, Ulrich decided to go fishing. But before setting out, he needed to repair a hole in his boat. He cut a square piece from a tarp and used wild glue to patch it. As the weather grew colder, the fish had hidden in deeper waters. To ensure a good catch with his net, he had to go to the center of the lake. Suddenly, a speedboat appeared on the lake. Anne spotted it first, thinking it was a routine medical check by the show's crew. Surprisingly, they were delivering equipment. Considering the approaching winter, the crew had decided to provide each contestant with a new fishing net to ease their survival challenges. This was a timely gift for Klaus and for Ulrich, who had just repaired his net boat. Wasting no time, he planned to spread the net 30 meters wide as he slowly headed towards the center of the lake. Ulrich successfully deployed his fishing net. Anne did not rush to cast hers. Outside her tent, she erected many wooden stakes and filled the gaps with moss to ensure her shelter was well insulated. Anne had the most food and just needed to keep her shelter warm to easily make it to the final round. Klaus also busied himself preparing for winter. He collected enough birch bark, not for eating this time, but to use as tinder for starting fires. After collecting a sufficient amount, he returned to his shelter, tearing the bark into small pieces and sawing many dry branches into sections. He spent half the day preparing firewood for the winter, a large bundle of tinder and a pile of sticks, enough to last until his withdrawal from the competition. By the time he finished, it was already dark. Dinner was just a few simple blueberries. Dinner. Meanwhile, Meta had been struggling with her makeshift stove for 3 days and had finally gotten it to work, albeit not very effectively. The fire burned outside, but her shelter remained cold, leaving Meta nearly frozen. 18 days in, the competition site was covered in snow. Today, Meta still decided to tinker with her stove, unsure when it would become useful. Like Ulrich, Klaus finally started to act. He too was preparing a small boat to cast his fishing net into deeper waters. It was a good plan, but it was unclear when he would actually start. With the same progress, Ulrich was ready to cast his net again today. Despite the extreme cold, fortunately, his boat wasn't frozen. He fixed one end of the net to a frame and set off as usual. Although the lake was windy, it was no match for the experienced fisherman, and he managed to deploy both nets. Now all that was left was to catch the fish. Over at Klaus's side, he had planned to take his boat out to cast the net, but noticing the strong wind on the lake today, he opted for safety and went fishing from the shore. Expecting to return empty-handed again, he was surprised to catch a fish after starving for days. It wasn't as glorious as his fishing trips at sea, but starvation made the size irrelevant. Seeing his kids starving, he immediately gutted the fish and stuffed the roe into his mouth. Unbeknownst to him, this was just the beginning of a harsh winter, with snowstorms soon to follow. Today marks Ulrich's 14th day in the challenge. His wilderness mansion is beginning to take shape. Now he needs to find some protein to replenish his energy. Building the shelter these past few days has been quite demanding. Without food soon, he'll become drastically thin. Using an enhanced compound bow to hunt birds is overkill. As expected, he returned empty-handed this morning. After whistling on a rock for a long time, not a single bird call was heard. Reluctantly, he had to return to the shelter to warm up. However, his shelter is hardly warm, shocking the medical team during their routine check yesterday because of its simplicity in such cold weather. Therefore, today's task is to fortify the shelter. He sawed a few logs to frame a proper door, securing it with umbrella cord, and constructing a wooden door. After measuring, he began cutting tarpaulin, making the shelter look less rudimentary. Just as he finished, snowflakes began to fall from the sky. This morning, Meta's tea mug was frozen solid, and even her umbrella cord had turned into a piece of art. Sensing trouble, she immediately started building a fireplace, planning an external half-underground design to avoid filling the shelter with smoke. She dug a pit with a shovel, gathered suitable stones, and slowly built a hearth shape with wood.